This is Real Talk, where we talk with real everyday leaders about amazing leadership insights, experiences, and lessons learned. My name is Mark Christensen, and I am delighted to have on our talk today, Frank Boudreau. Frank, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Mark, how are you?
I'm great. Frank, you and I met probably about 8 or 9 years ago down in Nashville, Tennessee.
It's been a few years, yes.
It's been a few years, yes. And I was impressed with what you're doing there. I had the opportunity to come in and do some leadership training with the organization that you were working with at the time. And Frank, by way of introduction of you, you have had over 20 years of experience working with workplace leaders. We're going to use the term everyday leaders here in a minute.
Okay.
A lot of your experience has been in aerospace and logistics. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
You're not based in Nashville anymore. You're based in Tulsa, which really is your home. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. I was born on the East Coast, believe it or not, in Massachusetts, but when I was a child, my mother took us from the East Coast to the West Coast, where my father passed away at a very young age, and she had family that lived in California. So in the early 70s, she drove me and my two sisters all the way out to California in a 67 Mercury Cougar, and that's where she met my little brother's dad. And later on, my little brother came along, but he grew up in Oklahoma. And so a few years after that, we moved to Oklahoma. I was just coming into junior high, I think. And from then on, I pretty much spent the majority of my life in Oklahoma, although I spent a few years in Texas, and then, of course, a year or so in Tennessee, where I got a chance to meet you.
Yeah, wonderful. And some of the things that I think are interesting about your experience is the amount of work you've done with technical professional leaders, those that have done a great job professionally, engineers, they may be technicians or IT type folks. And then they're thrown into this role of leadership without necessarily the tools to do well at that new role, that new job. It's a different job for sure. And you also have quite a bit of experience in the the field of lean, right? You're a lean master coach and a Six Sigma black belt. You picked that up along the way, I suppose.
Yeah, early in my time as a leader, my first leadership position, I grew up in the manufacturing world. My first job out of school was in manufacturing, out on the factory floor, and my first position as a leader was a production manager in the mid 90s. So been at it for a pretty long time. And I immediately started digging into some books to help me as a leader, to help me learn how to better lead people, to learn and grow and develop myself. So I started reading a lot of books, and John Maxwell's books really helped me tremendously. A lot of good information, a lot of good material there. But at the same time, there was a lot of things that I had to learn the hard way.
Uh-huh.
And, dealing with people and talking to people and motivating people, all those people skills, especially back in that point in time, there wasn't a whole lot out there that really helped you get good at that. So I had to do a lot of that on my own. I was fortunate in that I had a lot of natural abilities in that arena as well. So that really helped me, but it certainly didn't make me an expert. I got recruited to come up to the Tulsa area. At the time, I was living in Texas for a few years, but I got recruited to come back to Tulsa, back home, and to be an operations manager in the glass industry. And in around 2010, 2008, 2010, things were getting pretty shaky and rocky. You may remember that time. And I got laid off. Yeah, it was a little rough,
Yeah.
And our company downsized several times. And, when you're the guy that's coaching and teaching and training, there's only so long where they can keep you. I mean, at some point they have to focus on keeping the guys that are, turning the wrenches and making parts. And so, and I knew that was a risk in the positions that I held, but that was okay. So I got laid off. And then not long after that, I got into the aerospace industry. I went to work for a manufacturer of aerospace parts, a fabricator. And not long after being there as a manager, I started getting involved in a lot of projects. So I'm kind of going somewhere with that. Got really involved in a lot of projects. And it turned out I had a bit of a knack for, understanding process flow, understanding processes, being able to see things that weren't really there, but also combined with some people skills. I was really able to get groups of folks to work together to improve. Now, at the time, I didn't know that was called lean, but I was diving into it. And then, of course, I started picking up some books that were about lean and, being able to see things a little bit differently, the Toyota Way and several other books along the way. And so learning firsthand by implementing those things that I learned by reading and a lot of trial and error, I got better and better at it. And let's see, I guess it was about 2011, I jumped off into Spirit Aerosystems, which was a tier 2 supplier to Boeing. So they do a lot of major assembly work. And I was on a team of about 7 or 8. We did Kaizen events. We had some of the top consultant firms come in and work with us and teach and coach us. And along the way, it's something that I just got better and better at it, to a point, after a while, I became the trainer of our new lean folks. They had basically a plan where they would bring people in and have them work as a lean coach for a year or two. And then the idea was to have them move off into operations so that they have the lean background, and now they're applying that to being a manager out on the shop floor. Mm-hmm. And so I got the pleasure of actually training and coaching many of those folks. That's where the lean master coach came into play. I had to kind of up my game to a level, be able to kind of deliver, right? Give those guys some tools that they could use.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We've, our focus with Learning Point is leadership, but over the years, in fact, part of, I think, where we met, a lot of the clients and organizations that have hired us in they've been implementing lean, and they discovered that the leadership side of things was so important, to make lean work. So over the past 12 to 15 years, we've learned a lot about lean from lean experts like you as we've been helping organizations with leadership. So that they definitely go hand in hand, and there's a lot of great tools that I believe come out of the lean process, the lean system, the Toyota production system, and that type of thing. So that's been interesting. Now, I want to give us a chance to dive into your book. Yep. You, along the way, you have created this coaching and leadership consulting practice, Launch Point, and you recently have written a book in the past few years, right? Although it's probably, you mentioned the other day, it's been a work in progress for a while, right? You've titled the book Everyday Leader, which was intriguing to me because that means something to me. I hope that my understanding of what everyday leader means is similar to yours. Take a minute and explain to us, everyday leader, what that term means to you.
Oh, absolutely. And I take a holistic approach when I think about leaders and leadership. For years, we used to hear, leave work at work when you come home and leave home at home when you come to work.
Yeah.
But what I find is that both are dramatically impactful on the other. One is impactful to the other. And what I also find, and what I hope, is that most would like to be able to see that they're the same person no matter where they go. And if I'm going to focus on being the same person no matter where I go, then I can be me. Now, I might need to work on me and develop me, but I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to, what mode am I in today? I can really focus on just being the best version of me that I can be no matter where I am. And so I take a holistic approach when I work with people. And when I think about the everyday leader, I think about the person that's trying to lead in the home front, trying to lead out in the workplace, trying to lead among their friends or in ministry circles or other nonprofit organizations. We get involved in all kinds of things in our lives. We're busier than we've ever been. And so if you want to try to be something different in each one of those arenas and leave one when you go to the other, when you start juggling 3 or 4 different places where you really spend a lot of time, that could get pretty hectic and difficult to juggle. And so I'm a firm believer in, being who you are in every aspect of your life And if you need to improve in one aspect of your life, it's only going to help you in other aspects of life. And so what I've found, and we'll talk a little bit more about where that book came from, but my mother is 75 years old. She just turned 75 years the other day. And she got a hold of my book shortly after as a matter of fact, I think she probably bought more books than anybody. She was giving them to everybody for Christmas. Like every one of my family members got a book for Christmas, but, you know, bless her. Hey, she's my biggest hero. Outside of my wife, she's my biggest hero. My wife is my biggest hero. She's awesome. But my mother, she has told me several times that in reading my book, it has helped her as a grandmother and a great grandmother be a better grandmother and a better great grandmother. And that really hit me. And what that told me was these principles, they're applicable anywhere and everywhere. And so back to your original question of, you know, what does it mean an everyday leader? It's everybody. And we're all asked to lead in some way, shape, or form. We're all asked to lead in some capacity. And so the more we know and understand these principles and we can realistically apply them to our everyday life, the more impactful we're going to be in all the circles that we operate in and around all the people that we work with.
I love that. I love how you described, you know, the leader that you are at home, the leader that you are in your private world, in the community, at church. The more that can be the same leader that you are at work, even those environments are different, but it's the same you. You may have to work on yourself, right? The leader you are today may not be exactly the same as tomorrow, but it's you, and just that authenticity is so important. And I'm just wondering, you know, when I think of that term everyday leader and what you're talking about, I also think of the leader in the trenches, you know, the frontline leader, the leader on the floor, as opposed to the leader on the top floor. They're the leader on the manufacturing floor, or they're in the trenches. And I know that I believe that role, that leadership at that level is so crucial, so essential for most organizations.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
They're
the ones that really keep the motor running.
Yeah, keep the motor running. I mean, in terms of the car analogy, if the car is the organization, they may not have their hands on the steering wheel, but they're the tread on the tire, and you don't go anywhere without that implementation, right? And it's got to be synchronized. Well, that's great. How would you describe how that role has changed, the role of the frontline leader, the everyday leader? Has it changed over the past 20, 30 years from when you started out to now?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
How would you characterize some of the big differences?
Well, let me first preface that with, I'm addressing this from multiple different arenas, okay? Well, first of all, like I said, I started out, I always kind of want to qualify what I'm going to tell you. You know, I started out on the manufacturing floor, and, you know, I really hate to use the term worked my way up, but that's just kind of how it happened, okay? So I did essentially work my way up. And I've carried roles. I haven't been the CEO of a massive organization, but I have carried roles as high as an operations manager with, you know, multiple leaders that I was leading. So being a leader of leaders, which is yet another dynamic in and of itself. But I've been that frontline leader. I've been that guy in the trenches, but not just in the workplace. You know, I've been a leader in the ministry world for a very long time. Currently a national representative, a national leader in a national motorcycle ministry. I've been a praise and worship leader at my church. I was a praise and worship leader at my church for years. As a matter of fact, I went through a process where two churches were merging together, and I had the fun job of taking two complete worship teams. If you've ever been around worship teams and spent a lot of time around them, there's a lot of emotion. And so it was my job to meld these two teams together and create one team and, you know, find some continuity there. And I was very fortunate in it, and it worked out very well, and everybody survived, including me. But back to the question, you know, 25 years ago, organizations primarily ran from that top down. There's one leader and the rest follow. Even if you had multiple layers of leadership, That frontline leader, or as we spoke of earlier, the individual contributors that are those trained professionals, they simply had marching orders and they were expected to just go march. And if you were allowed to ask a question, that's all you were allowed to do is just ask the question. The answer will come. But today it's completely different. Today, every individual is expected to be a leader of themselves, expected to be a self-starter, expected to be able to learn and understand what's expected of them and make decisions within those parameters. And frontline leaders, we're expecting more out of them than we ever have before. We're expecting frontline leaders to be very dynamic. We're expecting them to be coaches. We're expecting them to be mentors. We're expecting them to be able to facilitate meetings. If you visit the average factory floor, I know we're talking about more than just manufacturing, obviously.
Sure.
But I'm sure these things happen in the academic circles as well as in the office.
Healthcare.
Well, I know they do, as a matter of fact. But we're expecting, out on the manufacturing floor, we're expecting frontline leaders to have daily meetings with their whole team. We're expecting them to hold weekly meetings where they give vision and expectation. We're expecting them to have leadership skills that, in most cases, they're only going to learn on the go. What we expect out of every position and a level of leadership from every position has dramatically increased over the last 20 years, I believe.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I'd like to talk a little bit about this special person, the technical profession that's thrown into the role of leadership. I want to start, though, by just getting your opinion. Do you believe that leadership can be learned? Is it something that can be learned, or is it something that some people have it and some people don't? What's your opinion on that?
I absolutely believe that it can be learned, because I learned it. And, I first read about it in John Maxwell's book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. He talks about that. Sure, there are some folks that have some natural leading ability and others that their leading ability may be strained a little bit. But as a matter of fact, here's something else I've learned, especially in the last several years, as I've utilized the DISC, and there's other personality profile tests that you can take that'll give you generally the same kind of information.
Uh-huh.
But what I've learned is, as we become more self-aware, we learn what our strengths are. And if we learn what our strengths are, become very self-aware, we can very quickly lead out of those strengths. We don't all have to be that take charge, nothing, no holding back and go knock things down. To be a good leader, we can lead out of our strengths if we know and understand what they are. And so learning how to first be self-aware, but then learning how to lead out of those strengths, and also understand where we don't excel, and knowing how to communicate that with your team, and your team understands. You'll always find somebody on your team that's actually strong in that area, and you can really utilize their strengths as well, which is another leadership trait, right? Learning how to utilize the strengths of your team.
Yeah, tap into their leadership. That's excellent. So let's talk for a minute about that technical professional. The engineer, they do a great job.
Yep.
They get thrown into managing a project or leading a project. IT, in the scientific fields, technicians. There's a predominance of challenges when people in those fields step into leadership. And oftentimes it's not necessarily a choice before they know it. In fact, I was talking with an individual this morning who is he's a geologist. He is now managing a fairly sizable department for the first time, because things have shifted, right? And he's like, hey, I never even considered myself to be a leader. Now I'm doing it, and I don't know what I'm doing, basically. I know how to do the geology work, but I don't know how to do this leadership thing. And I'm sure that you've found that over and over, because you've talked to me about, a lot of the work that you've done has been coaching these project leaders, training project leaders, new engineers on how to lead the people side of projects. So can you talk a minute about what is that experience that people are going through there?
Yeah, my first real experience with that was many years ago. Again, I was working for a parts manufacturer in the aerospace industry, and they had grown to a size that they really needed to improve their infrastructure. And one of the things that they decided to do was adopt an ERP system. Well, they quickly realized how expensive that could actually be.
Yeah.
And they happened to have an IT professional on staff that had it was just very fortunate. They had an IT professional on staff that had a lot of experience with writing software similar to what we were talking about accomplishing. And so they hired a couple of more guys to help write software and develop this internal software. Now, these guys were sharp, very intelligent, very good at what they do. I mean, very good. But the owner gave the challenge of ease of use. He said, I want this to be so simple that anybody can learn it.
Yeah.
And I want it to be so easy to use that they don't have to spend a lot of time on it. Well, the only way you're going to do that is if you really understand the user aspect of it. So these guys had to come out of their office and learn how all these people work and function and develop a user interface that made sense to them and not the IT guy.
Yeah.
And so that was my first experience. I was tasked with kind of being that liaison between the manufacturing team and the IT team and helping them bridge that gap, helping them make that communication, bridge that communication gap so that they could really understand one another. And so the manufacturing team didn't want to throw them out of their office. And so that the IT team didn't want to just quit because they were just too frustrated, right?
Right.
And so that was my first real experience with that and working with those guys. Again, very intelligent. They really wanted to help and make a product that was used because they took pride in the work that they did. And so helping them learn how to communicate, helping them learn how to ask really good questions and get feedback directly that they can work with and use. That was my first real taste of that. But then when I moved into, again, a larger tier 2 supplier working, and at that time, that site had roughly about 3,000 people. And we probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 or 80 engineers. So I got a chance to work with a lot of engineers. And what I found was a lot of engineers get hired, business owners, general managers, top level leaders. They see an issue or a challenge or a problem or a process that needs improved, and they hire very intelligent people. And they spend good money on these very intelligent people, as they should. They're worth their weight in gold if they can be effective. But what I found was these folks would get hired in to solve a problem. But as we well know, very few problems are solved by one individual. It takes a team to solve a problem. And so within weeks, or if they're lucky, they get to wait a month or two of getting hired onto an organization, they're tasked with projects. And it might be 1 or 2 or 3 projects at one time. They're charged with leading a cross-functional team, people from different departments, different styles, different communication styles, different dynamics, different education levels, you name it, just a very wide variety of people on a small team of 6, 8, or 10. And so these very sharp, very smart individuals are tasked with leading people. And so now, instead of being the expert, they're struggling because they're just not quite sure how to communicate and interact with them well. Something as simple as facilitating a meeting effectively and really getting what is needed out of the meeting so we're not wasting time, but we get the maximum amount of effectiveness out of that meeting before we close it. Getting actions done. Another thing that I've watched them struggle tremendously with, they have a meeting, everybody walks out of there with action items, but nobody technically reports to that engineer, whether it's a quality engineer, a process engineer, a manufacturing engineer, you name it, an IT professional. Nobody reports directly to that person. And so they've got all these other competing responsibilities.
Yeah.
And then this IT professional or this engineer, they get frustrated because they feel like their project that they're responsible for keeps getting put on the back burner by the individuals that have tasks that need to be done. Mm-hmm. And so they go to meeting after meeting and very little gets done, and project gets drug out way longer than it ever should. And so I spent a lot of time working with so many of those folks and helping them learn how to motivate their team, how to interact with their team, how to gain trust, how to effectively lead when they don't have positional authority. I teach them how to get permissional authority. And that takes a lot of interpersonal skills to be able to do that. but they can be learned. I watched individuals that stumbled on every other word. They struggled with, just being able to open up in front of a group of people. And over a period of time, they were commanding the room. Their team was engaged and excited to get work done, and they were accomplishing things, which was ultimately the end result you're looking for, right? Is getting things done.
Yeah, that's great. We found the same thing. Give them a set of tools, and I mean, we've got a little phrase that we like to say is, "Hey, the mojo isn't in the tool. It's not in us. It's in you. The tools are just going to help you get your mojo out." Which I like what you said earlier about, lead from your strengths, lead with your strengths.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good leadership in those people in those roles. They just need a set of tools to work with. And I know that you've put together some tools on that. And I want to talk a little bit about your book, Everyday Leader. You decided to write a book, which is very difficult to do, especially when you're really, really busy, right? It's hard to get that book written, but you did it. Here it is. So why did you start to write a book? When did it start? Tell us a little bit about what that experience has been like writing this.
Okay. Well, I have to confess first that when I was writing the book, I didn't actually know I was writing the book. So let me explain what that means. In about 2005, 2006 timeframe, I was working with that aerospace parts manufacturer, and the ownership of the company asked me to get involved with helping to develop his frontline leadership team, his management staff. So the GM, the shipping manager, and so on, so HR manager, so on and so forth. So a group of about 6, and I was basically working with them, helping them, coaching them. I didn't know what it was called at the time, but I was just being utilized. He was utilizing some leadership skills by focusing me on my strengths.
Yeah.
So he had the wherewithal to say, you know what, it's worth to have this guy just spend all of his time coaching these leaders. And so we had a great time. We learned a lot. But along the way, we went through some hiring challenges, I guess I should say. So all you business owners out there, you'll be able to relate to this. You interview somebody for, a frontline leader position, or maybe even a mid-level leader position. Interview's great, experience looks great, resume looks fantastic, well-spoken, but man, are they not the right fit. And we experienced a couple of challenges where one of them was virtually a train wreck. We almost wound up in a legal issue over it. So it was a difficult lesson to learn, but the owner, he got to thinking about that, and he said, we have a lot of very sharp individuals that work for us, people that we've known for a long time, and we trust them. They work hard. They're well thought of in their circles in the workplace. But it's just unfortunate that they weren't ready to step into a leadership role when one came available. And we all know that people change, everything is in seasons. And so every organization has to go through the process of replacing a leader from time to time, and they were no different. So he decided, let's invest in those potential leaders, and let's start getting them ready so that when a position comes open, we're ready to just pick one.
Yeah.
Now, he also understood there's a risk in that. So you start developing these folks, and they may actually find, and I heard these words out of his mouth, they may find that they're ready for a leadership position and we don't have one available, and they may actually go elsewhere and find one.
Yeah.
He said, but I would much rather develop people and lose a few than develop none and keep them all.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's pretty wise.
Yeah.
So long story short, I started working with this group of about 30 that they had identified, weekly meetings. I coached them as groups in training sessions, and then I coached them one-on-one, and spent many months with these folks, developing them and helping them get to a place where they're ready to take on leadership positions. And, as time would tell, many, at least half of them wound up stepping into leadership roles of some capacity or another there in that company. We did lose a few that were ready and positions weren't available, but they were just simply ready to go and they had an opportunity. So, we hugged their necks, told them, we cheered them on and said, the best of luck to you. And if you ever decide to come back, give us a call. Mm-hmm. And I still know many of those folks today. Some of them are still in management positions. Several of them are business owners now doing their own thing. And so I stay in touch with some of those folks. Good people, but along the way, in order to kind of help them, I wanted them to learn how to develop themselves. So I needed to give them something to read that they would start to just pick up and read on their own. And I had read so many books. I can't even tell you how many. My library is full of them. So many books on leadership. And what I found is that most books on leadership written, they use examples that are difficult for us to connect with. So let me explain that. Most of them use presidents, professional athletes, maybe even astronauts, which they're all tremendous examples, and we can learn from them, absolutely. I mean, many of them use top-level CEOs of high-profile companies, and we can absolutely learn from them. But it's difficult for, as we're talking about, the everyday leader, the average guy and gal that's trying to lead their group of 5 or 10 or 15 people. It's difficult for them to connect with the experiences that they're reading about from these high-level, high-profile people. And that's what really got me to doing this. So I would be studying in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes, and I'd call them God thoughts. Sometimes I would just, I told you the other day, I was riding my motorcycle. I love to ride motorcycles. I was riding my motorcycle one day. I'm running down the highway, and I see a flock of seagulls. I live in Oklahoma. There's no seagulls in Oklahoma. I see a flock of geese take off from a pond. And of course, they immediately start forming into the V shape that we're all so familiar with seeing them. And I see on one side, I love some of the memes, you know, why are there more geese on one side than the other? I love some of those memes. They're funny. But anyway, I see this gap. It's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this gap. But in a perfect position, as if there was a goose in that spot, are the rest of them. And there's this blank spot. And I thought, well, that's really odd. And then I see, here comes this goose that was late getting off the ground. I don't know. Maybe he was busy eating his fish. I don't know. But he catches up to the rest of the flock and just slides right in that empty spot. He doesn't get in the back. He slides right in that empty slot. And I thought, holy cow, that is so cool. Oh. And that's interesting. Yeah. And it's interesting, if we know our people, we'll leave their slot open for them because we trust that they're going to get in there and fill it. Anyway, so I wound up with a leadership principle out of that. Yeah. And so I got to work. I sat down, I crafted an email and sent it out to the guys. And like I said, I just call it a God thought. Things like that, or I'm reading a book on leadership, or I'm reading a book on anything for that matter, and I hear a quote, or I see something online and I see a quote, and a quote gets me to thinking. I can't tell you how many of these I wrote sitting, in church listening to the pastor, and he would just say something in the middle of a sermon that I would go off on another tangent. And I still do it today. I'll literally start writing. So there's another book coming out similar to that one. But I would send these emails out from time to time, and that email list got bigger and bigger and bigger. And over time, it wound up a blog site. I'll bring this really short. It wound up a blog site that I kept writing on for years. And about 5 years ago, I really felt like the Lord's pressing me, you're going to write a book on leadership. And in my mind, I thought, okay, when I'm 80 and, retired and I'm sitting in a rocking chair bored, I'm going to sit down and write this book. I really never thought about it again. And then fast forward to a couple of years ago, I was doing some changes for my business, taking down one website, firing up another, so on and so forth. But I didn't want to lose all that work. So I took all of that work off of that website and put it into OneNote where I could categorize it, really kind of get a good look at it. And as I got to looking at it, I realized, oh my goodness, I've written a book. And I dumped it off into a program and counted the words, and it was a book. And 3 days later, I kid you not, 3 days later, from a resource that I use frequently to study, I get an email, and the title or the header in this email was, "Have you ever thought of writing a book?" So, it was like a whirlwind. Within weeks, I made the phone call, talked to a publisher. They said they love it. Nobody's doing it. Let's do it. And literally weeks later, it's a book. It was a group that was fantastic to work with. They're a sublet of HarperCollins Christian Publishing, and there it is. It's in front of you. So
Yeah, that's awesome. The thing, we don't do these real talk sessions to promote books. It's not our purpose. But this is part of your story, and I love it. And I love the book. And here's why: is this book, it has bite-sized nuggets that are very concise, very inspiring, right? That a leader could use one at a time to feed their team of leaders, right? So, or their people,
absolutely.
their team, whatever. Or they can pick it up every morning, read one paragraph, one little piece of this, and give them just a little bit more for that day, so it makes it very useful. We've just got a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask you, you've mentioned a few things here that caught my attention. One is that you have a motorcycle. And I don't know
Yes.
if for me, I've never had a motorcycle, but it must be midlife crisis, because I have this urge to get a shotgun, a horse, and a motorcycle. And my wife is like, no, I don't think you need any of those. All three of those would cause you problems. But what kind of motorcycle do you have?
I ride a Honda Goldwing.
Okay.
They call it the Cadillac of motorcycles.
Yeah.
I've been riding them for years. I'm on my fifth one. I love them. Yeah, they're great.
So, in addition to riding your motorcycle, what else do you enjoy? What brings you joy in life?
Well, I tell you, I'm extremely blessed in that I have fantastic relationships with my kids. I have 4 kids and 9 grandkids. My wife and I have been coaching couples for years, for a very long time, probably 10, 12 years now.
Okay.
And now we get the pleasure of coaching our kids in their marriage relationships, which is really a lot of fun.
They listen to you?
Oh, believe it or not, they do. I know that's rare. I know that's rare. Now, they don't always listen. Sometimes, hey, we're human. Sometimes they got to go learn on their own, make their own mistakes, right? And we don't pry. They come to us. Hey, if they come to us and ask, we're happy to sit down, and they often do. They'll come and say, hey, we're going through a struggle. Help us out. And believe it or not, they're not asking for a handout. They really are wanting to learn and grow and develop.
Yeah.
And so that's been such a pleasure for us. I also do a lot of woodworking. Matter of fact, the desk I'm sitting at right now, I just recently built, and right now I'm building some desks. My oldest son, his wife is homeschooling now because of COVID.
Yeah.
And so she's got 3 little ones she's trying to teach, and so I'm in the process of building desks for them.
Wow.
So I love working with wood. Yeah.
That's good. 9 grandkids. So we didn't cover this question, so I'm going to throw this at you, see how you answer it.
All right, go ahead.
Have you learned anything about leadership from your 9 grandkids? How old's the oldest? How old's the youngest?
My oldest is 11, and the youngest is about 7 or 8 months old.
Okay.
And 8 months now. And I learn from my kids and my grandkids all the time. I really do. I learned a tremendous principle just the other day where we're on our way down to my mother's house. And it's about an hour and a half drive, and 2 of my boys and their families were following along. So we got 3 cars running down the highway. And I love my kids because they'll shoot real with me, right? And so we get there and they're like, oh my gosh, Dad, you're like driving like crazy. I said, wait a minute, what do you mean? I was following the speed limit. Anyway, so we end up in this big conversation about how, my actions are, they pay attention.
Yeah.
And you know what? If I'll avail myself to being called out when I'm probably doing things that I should do differently, I'll learn from that. So yeah, I learn from my kids all the time, and my grandkids.
I like that story because I imagine that you avail yourself to being called out. They see that.
Yeah.
That has to build the trust, right? They know that they can talk to you open. They can talk to you real, which I think is awesome.
Sorry, I was just going to say that is a tremendous lesson to learn in the workplace too, but it's a little risky. A lot of times we think I'm too transparent. They're going to see too much.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how much trust you can build, and when you build that trust, man, your team will follow you anywhere if they really trust you, and if you're real genuine and realistic with them, man.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I agree. Frank, last question. I think I already know the answer. I think you've already answered this question on here, but when it comes to you as a leader and now as a coach, a leadership coach, you're kind of doing this full time now, right? And it sounds like you're doing it in lots of different avenues, not just workplace coaching, but in your ministry and couple coaching you mentioned. What is it that grounds you? Where do you get your center when it comes to what you offer and provide to those that you coach?
Well, I think it's being transparent and realistic. My kids ground me.
Yeah.
That helps me stay real. Maintaining those relationships are so important to me, and they help me stay well grounded. Like I said, I avail myself to being called out when I make mistakes, and it hurts sometimes. I'll be honest. I'll try to defend myself. But then I quickly realized, you know what? There's no defense. I made a mistake, and I can learn from it and grow from it. And I think that probably helps me more than anything, is just being transparent and availing myself, and just being confident in the fact that I don't have to be perfect, because nobody is. We've only had one perfect walk on this earth, and I'm not it. So, I'm okay with not being perfect. And that being the case, that just simply tells me that there's always room to learn, there's always room to grow, and I always want to keep learning and growing. So that's what helps me, is just staying transparent and being real with my family and my team.
That's awesome. Frank, thank you so much for your time, for what you've shared.
Absolutely.
Again, the book, Everyday Leader. Launch Point is the name of your consulting coaching practice, I take it, right?
Yeah, my website is launchpointnow.com.
Yeah, we'll put that up on our website.
Sounds good.
All right. Hey, thank you. We'll have to do this again soon, okay?
Sounds great, Mark. I appreciate it.
Have a great day. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.